Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to my Family Office platform. And a special thank you, as always, to my members of SFO Continuity. Well, among the most frequently requested guests, and he hasn't been on in like a year and a half, that I get is the gentleman today. So we're calling this Robles and Diamond. Of course, notice, Ron, how I have to put my name first. I'm sorry. This is nothing off limits. Well, you then know it features the one and only who I've known for many years, and he's a wonderful man, and he does help me think through a lot of issues. That's Ron Diamond. He's the chairman and CEO of Diamond Wealth. Ron chairs a syndicate of over 100 family offices, ranging from really $250 million to tens of billions of dollars. He's seen the mistakes, he's seen the misallocations, and he's seen everything up close for a long, long time as an active allocator himself. Many of you also know that besides being a pundit, a thought leader, and an allocator, that Ron also helped to launch Tiger 21's National Family Office program. He sits on the board of a wonderful organization at a major financial educational institution, really helping to guide some of their family office initiatives. And he also, come on, Ron is also the host and CEO of Family Office World Media. So we're going to share, we're going to agree on some things, and I hope to make it sparky for the audience. I'm sure we're going to disagree on certain things as well. We're going to talk about structural families and family offices, and about, from my perspective, the essential choices they're now making on reinventing or arguably retreating. Most single family offices, and I think this is one thing that Ron will agree with me on, they're not really built to last. So I believe in building better. I believe in first principles, leaner teams. And for me, those of you that know, certainly moving forward, and moving forward is right now, an AI-focused native infrastructure. Ron Diamond, my friend, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. You were more than a minute.
Okay. Yeah. That was, well, of course, you all know I try to keep my opens to a minute. It was probably closer to 2 minutes and 2 seconds. Ron, I'm very gracious that you're giving us an hour and a half. And here's what I'm going to say about Ron Diamond, everyone, that I cannot say about 90% of guests that I have on, because I'm known for being a little bit opinionated, a little bit different, and sometimes some would argue a little bit challenging and debating in my format. Ron Diamond did not hesitate a second. Ron Diamond does not need questions beforehand. He doesn't need to approve things. I respect that. More than anything else, Ron Diamond, you're the real deal, my friend. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So does family office, single family office AUM, how big they are in terms of assets, does it really correlate with excellence? Or is it more strategic clarity? And is that really the missing piece?
The short answer is no. Just because a family sold a widget company for $5 billion doesn't mean they're sophisticated at investing in private equity and venture capital and real estate. They're two different skill sets. So if you get a guy like Stephen A. Cohen, Ray Dalio, and they start a family office, it's a little bit different. But a lot of people made their money in things outside of finance. So Ty Warner made a lot of money in Beanie Babies. He was a brilliant businessman. I mean, he made billions of dollars. And he tried to buy the Four Seasons Hotel. He was in way over his skis. So I think you've got a huge amount of money in general in very inefficient hands.
Would you generally agree or disagree that having more assets within a single family office, let's assuming liquid and investable, let's even call it millions, so that's nothing, a billion or billions, does it give them more capability of being excellent with talent and resources and systems, or arguably it could be a hindrance?
It gives them more capability because they have the resources to do it. Yes.
But would you often agree that although in theory it gives them more capability, again, they founded a business or they were a significant person, they have a liquidity event, that's not necessarily going to carry over to building a single family office, to managing teams and instituting systems or trusting in the right people to do so? Does it create a level of challenges that a smaller sub $500 million family office maybe doesn't necessarily have?
Yeah, but I mean, remember, we're still in the very early innings of this. Look, I think 68% of the family offices that exist started since 2000, half since 2008. So this is a very new industry in general. The model doesn't work. 25% make it to the second generation, 10 to the third, 5 to the fourth. The industry from a macro standpoint is fragmented, siloed, and inefficient. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that because somebody has a liquidity event doesn't necessarily mean they're a good steward of managing money. And I think the two are two completely different skill sets.
I agree with everything Ron said, but some of our solutions are probably going to look a little different, and that's what makes it exciting. So a little bit of a hook for about 10, 15 minutes from now. But Ron, I have to hit you with a little bit of the chuckle question, and let's get right to it. Should family offices be preparing in the US and the West for, let's call it, for authoritative momentum as a macro driver, given the current president, the state of the West, and what's going on around the world?
You could ask me today. I don't know today the different. It'll be different tomorrow than it is today. So I don't know the answer to the question.
Okay, I'm not going to let you off that easy because we're going to have more and more upcoming. Why don't I rephrase it a little bit? As an allocator yourself, which I am, and both of us knowing a lot of incredible families and family offices, do you think that looking at geopolitical and macro pictures and political pictures are important in understanding the landscape, the tax picture, and the direction of where things are going?
Well, yeah, you have to. I mean, a lot of businesses, the market doesn't like uncertainty, and with the tariffs, it's uncertainty. I mean, I majored in economics at Northwestern. Economics 101 is if you have tariffs, that's going to increase. That's going to cause inflation, and it's going to increase the prices. Period. And I agree with many of the policies. I just disagree with the way that in which they're executed.
Okay, that's a very fine-tuned quasi-political answer, but I do appreciate it. Let me push back a little bit. I actually did a solo video yesterday where I spoke about quote unquote experts. Uh, if I'm an economist and I'm in my late 40s, early 50s, I went to school decades ago. How the world works now is different than currently as it is. There's new inputs from crypto to AI to a variety of different geopolitical challenges. Do we get caught up in the fact that that person that I described is too busy to learn new things, often has a level of success that may feed into their ego after decade, is somewhat ignorant, and could I argue, maybe a little fearful that what they learned and what worked in the past is not going to work moving forward? If I get caught up on macro economic issues that were applicable in the 80s, yeah, some of that may be applicable now, but the world has changed. Don't I have to adapt my thinking?
Well, you do when it's necessary, but tariffs cause prices to increase. Period. End of conversation.
Well, I mean, that's a very, very narrow picture. Would you agree that currently, as we were doing things decade after decade, having wicked trade imbalances, from my perspective, having the world walk all over us, that correcting wrongs and moving forward, you're correct. Markets don't like uncertainty. So we look at Liberation Day, April 2nd, it seemed like a cluster, you know what, and a disaster. Would you state that recorrecting the trade imbalances is something that may take weeks, months, even a year to play out, and that's beneficial long term?
Well, look, I agree. I think that we have been taken advantage of, and I do think we do have to change the policies, the trade policies. There's no question. My question is how we're executing it, and I just think that we do need to change the policies, but the way in which we do it, and with the uncertainty, and with doing one thing one day and one thing the next day, and having the market react, and having countries that are our friends act like we're their enemies, it gives an instability, and I think that's not good. That's not a good thing.
I hear what you're saying. I would say to a degree, you're not incorrect. The man does appear to thrive a little bit in chaos. He does appear to be, quote unquote, meaning Trump, obviously, adapting his opinion. Some would say listening more to Besant, and things are adapting. But from my perspective, looking at the Biden administration, look at what Harris wanted to do, which was basically a continuation. And from my perspective, a severe lack of economic and monetary policy knowledge on her part. I think something had to be done. The guy deems to be, quote unquote, a deal maker. And sometimes there needs to be chaos to shake things up in, quote unquote, no one likes this word, a new world order. but sometimes you have to create chaos.
Yeah, I would agree that sometimes you have to create chaos. I think as the president of the United States, I think it's a little different than creating chaos as the president of a company.
Okay. And again, we're going to come back to a lot of these issues in monetary policy. This is a longer form interview. We have a lot to cover. Related to that, and maybe more of a geopolitical type question, we are for sure in a multipolar world. This is not just the US. I could argue it's not even just the US and China, although it kind of is. It's a multipolar world. And that probably is inevitable in the world moving forward. How should capital, so I'm twisting my question a little bit, how should family investing in capital move forward in the challenges of a multipolar world where I could argue in many ways China is ahead of us?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It depends on the size of the family office. It also is going to depend on if you're going to be doing direct deals or not direct deals, if you're going to be investing just in funds, or if you're going to how you're going to do it. So it really depends on what type of family office you're going to be in what direction. But yeah, the macro, the world, the global economy makes a huge difference. A lot of the family offices that we invest with focus predominantly in the U.S. It's just the world that I'm in. So it doesn't have as much of an impact, but there's no question that we live in a global village, and it does make what happens in one part of the world makes a huge difference in another part of the world.
And geopolitical issues, US debt, which is massive and growing and slightly disappointing for me from what Trump is doing from that perspective. But we may dive into that a little later. But I do want to hit upon something that you just said that I agree with you. The US is still the king of the capital markets. It still is, quote unquote, the US. Most American families are built, and even Western families, around quote unquote US companies that have dominated. Families tend to be a little bit slow to change. Given that we're both world travelers, that we both have relationships out of the US, and I think a lot about sovereign risk, I don't know if I want to have 95% of my assets and resources tied effectively to the US dollar. That makes me look at gold, that makes me look at Bitcoin, and selectively companies in other countries that don't necessarily rely on the US. How do you look at, as an allocator, being a little bit more diverse than most US families are?
Well, first of all, I've never, other than just a token dollar amount, I've never invested in Bitcoin. And anytime it's been presented to me, here's how it started. They say, dude, then there's a pause, and then they explain it to me. It's hard for me to understand it. I don't fully grasp everything from a Bitcoin standpoint. So from a crypto standpoint, we don't invest in that. Doesn't mean it's not going to go up fivefold, but you can't do everything and you can't be an expert in everything. And I am a firm believer, if you know something well, do it. And if you don't know something, just avoid it. Doesn't mean it's bad. Just means I don't understand it.
I'll give Ron credit. I think that's a very fair answer. My perspective would be, of course, I'm an older gentleman. I'm older than Ron. I felt that way maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I put in the time. And yeah, I looked horrific, by the way, in 2022. I was maybe a little bit of a too early adapter, but there comes a point when something hits you in the face so hard. And obviously, over the last 7 or 8 years, X of 22, it's done incredibly well. No guarantee it's going to do that moving forward. But I appreciate that your answer is very honest. Ron, since you hinted at it just a second ago, let's get something that is really directly in your wheelhouse. You have very strong opinions about. Are single family offices, and I'm being broad there, truly equipped to underwrite direct investments, or are they chasing heat and really they lack the structure, the talent, and the risk discipline?
Only a handful can do it properly. Paul Carbone's a good friend. He runs a family for Tony and JB Pritzker. He's got a team of 65 people. They can compete directly with Carlyle and Blackstone and KKR. And it's actually a better model because they've got patient capital. The one thing that families do have, the advantage, is that we have patient capital. So if you look at how the private equity model works today, a private equity firm is going to buy a garage door company in Des Moines, Iowa. I could tell you when they buy it, ballpark, when they're going to sell it, because I know how they're compensated. Doesn't make them bad people. It's just how the compensation structure. They're going to hold it probably for about 5 years. Typically, they're going to sell it could be to a strategic, but typically to another private equity firm. And they're going to hold it for another 5 years. If you look over the course of 20 years, this one company is going to change hands 4 to 5 times. Let's call it 4 times. If you look at the taxes and the friction and the inefficiency and the disruption in business versus a family who could simply buy it, hold it, let it compound, the results aren't even close. So objectively, the model, the family office model, is objectively a superior model. The problem is very, very few families can execute. I think that's starting to change, but right now only a handful can do it. I think in 3 to 5 years, more and more will.
I mean, broadly, from my perspective, I don't disagree with Ron. We're going to get to some of this shortly. I actually, like Ron, feel that most family offices are definitely very, very far from optimized, and being a little bit kind, not really that good. Now, I think we have different solutions. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But staying on the topic that you just described, do I need, and in my case, having a family office and a holding company and bringing in an operator, do I really need to build out a significant team? I mean, look at the public markets except this year. The last 2 years have done great. Look at the dynamics of AI and Bitcoin. Look at how things are changing. The whole model of me needing to build out and have a big team and or only become a passive LP investor. How am I engaging the rising generation? How am I making them understand how the real world works, how to roll up their sleeves to get their hands dirty? Isn't there value in becoming more active as a direct investor, and that you don't really need to have a team of 65 people?
Well, you don't. I mean, it depends what you want to do. If you invest in the public markets and you don't invest in the private markets and vet all these private equity and venture capital and real estate deals, you don't need nearly as big of a team. That's certainly true. But if you are going to build a team, one of the problems that family offices have is they've got the compensation model wrong.
Yes.
Most family offices, and not all, but most family offices look at compensation as a cost. So let's say they hire a student out of Stanford and they pay him $250,000. Not all, but most family offices say that costs me $250,000. If Blackstone or Carlyle or KKR hires somebody out of Stanford and pays them $250,000, they look at that student as a potential $20 million profit center. It's not a cost. And until family offices get the compensation model right, which is one of the many things they have to do, they're not going to be able to compete directly with the Carlyles and the Blackstones. If they do, and when they do, and I think they will, it'll change, but it's going to happen very, very slowly. But it's going to change because, again, objectively, by having patient capital and not having a shot clock, you have a huge, huge advantage. It gives you a lot more flexibility.
We'll get to this a little more later, but I think AI is going to be the control layer for everything. I think it's making it easier if they're implementing it to make decisions, including on direct investments, and effectively do more with less. But related to what you just said, I agree on compensation. Let's talk a little bit about that. So if I give carry, like what's really the downside? But if I have co-investment and maybe I got a bonus and gross up to give it to the executive, they have skin in the game, maybe phantom equity. How do you look at compensation, and what do you find to be the most valuable in attracting top talent?
Well, first of all, also understand a lot of family offices pay their CIOs pre-tax, which is insane. You should pay them after tax, and most family offices don't. And what that does is it causes a little bit of a conflict, right, from the CIO to the matriarch or patriarch, because at the end of the day, let's say you're going to do something called structural alpha, tax loss harvesting, or you're going to do PPLI policy. That might not be as relevant to the CIO who's compensated strictly on pre-tax versus if he was compensated on post-tax. So I think one of the changes that's going to happen is as we educate this next generation and as family offices move into the next generation, I do believe that more and more families are going to look at things on an after-tax basis. I think that's the only rational way to do it. And I think today they don't.
Interesting. Well, Ron, in my house, I do have to ask you some of the quasi uncomfortable questions because partially it's what I do. To your credit, again, you didn't want to pre-list. Here you go. Here's one of them. Does DEI become a Trojan horse for corrosion and institutional decay? Forget about the country, forget about companies, just simply even within a family office.
Well, I think DEI's gotten out of hand.
Okay, we're on the same page there. Okay, I guess not much to debate or argue with. What And I know we're going a little bit into my wheelhouse here, but I respect how you think and your critical thinking. What happens when AI, and damn it, Ron, in some ways it's getting close, outperforms human, although I hate the word experts, let's go with that, and we keep on paying for legacy thinking? Do you look at AI and what happens when Einstein's a 160 IQ, a moron's 80? That, I think that's a 2.4x multiple. What happens when AI's IQ, let's go with that, a little bit linear, keeps on multiplying and it's just smarter than 99.999% of humans on Earth? Even Bill Gates, and we have very different political perspectives, said within 10 years, only the top legal, accounting, medical doctors are really going to be viable and have a job. That's obviously going to impact finance and family offices.
I disagree with that. I think that AI is going to have a huge impact. I mean, I gave a lecture at Stanford, and the professor who spoke right before me had a picture of a fire, a picture of a wheel, the word internet, the word AI. And what he was saying is that, in his opinion, and I agree with it, that as transformative as the wheel or fire or the internet was to our society changing, AI is going to have as big, if not a bigger impact. So I totally agree with that. But I also think that we're humans and we adjust to things. And I don't think that AI is going to control and conquer the world. I think it's going to make it better. There will be bad actors. There's no question about it. But I think in general, it can also be used for really good things. I mean, the fact that it could think so quickly, think about what it can do for the cure of pancreatic cancer, or prostate cancer, or diabetes, or any of these diseases. Healthcare is the area that it's going to help the most in. Now, there will be bad actors because it's just the way humans are wired, but I'm more optimistic than pessimistic.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good take. We disagree on part of it, but not on all of it. We're going to come back to AI a little bit later, although what Ron just said on healthcare is actually coming up very shortly. I'm going to turn my attention to, I only gave it a brief glimpse, then I did a little video on it 2 days ago. I did take a look at the recent UBS 2025 single family office report. The fact that they have 317 SFOs globally, and the average AUM is 1.1 billion, that's a pretty darn good sample size. So a couple of things I picked up in it, and they're more investing centric at first. They basically saw allocations to public equities enhancing from 26% in 24 to 29%, a pretty big bump this upcoming year. In your allocations and the families that you're representing who may feel they may get alpha, aka delta, in private deals, do you still see them chasing public markets, being tactical or being passive and beta in their approach?
No, I used to run a hedge fund, and in the '90s when I ran a hedge fund, it wasn't easy, but it was easier to create alpha in the public markets.
Mhm.
I think today it's very hard. I have all my money in the public markets. I just have an index funds, and I would argue with anybody that that's the most efficient thing to do. In the private markets, private equity, venture capital, real estate, different special situations, I think you can create alpha. That's where I think the alpha is created. So what we do, I invest alongside with all these families, is we just invest in the public markets. That's where I think the alpha is created. I think the public markets are still really good, but I think the best strategy is to put your money in an index fund with tax aware investing. And I think that's the way, certainly the way I'm playing it.
Interesting. So you did mention healthcare. When I looked at the report, this might have been a little bit more applicable to public companies, but it probably applies to privates. They mentioned three, let's go with the word sectors that were driving interest. Well, one, what a surprise, AI, and other related to AI was energy. And the other that you brought up, which relates to genetics and AI, so that appears to be a common theme, is healthcare. Is that generally trends that you're seeing from a big picture perspective as well?
It's hard for me to answer that question. I mean, we're more opportunistic, so we don't necessarily invest so much thematically. We invest when a family office has a particular deal and they're going to put $200 million into it and they need $50 million more, and we look at the opportunity and we think it's a good opportunity, we'll invest in it. So we don't really invest so much by themes. We invest much more opportunistically.
And when I looked at the report relative to, let's call it private company investments, They expected it to come down from 22% to 21%, pretty modest, but heading into this year down to 18%. The why, I believe, centered around high financing costs, stagnant exits, and valuation fatigue. Is that a trend that you're seeing, or why are you and the families you know and represent moving in a different direction?
Well, I think more and more companies are staying private longer. I think alpha is being created while the companies are private before they go public. So I think a lot of the profits made before the company goes public. So I think the number of public companies is going down and will continue to decrease, and the number of privately held companies is going to increase and will continue to increase. I mean, look, I ran a hedge fund, and if I'm running a hedge fund and you've got a company and you've got to report to me or to an analyst every 90 days, it's a hard way to run a company, right? Because you're basically managing earnings. Private equity and venture capital took off in 1987, 88, because it was a better model, right? 2% covers the overhead, 20% I make money if you make money, versus a publicly traded company who has to manage earnings every 90 days. So this became a multi-trillion dollar industry. The problem is that it's also now, and this is why I think there's going to be a disruption. I think we're at an inflection point. I think as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the late 80s, I believe that family offices, they're not going to replace, but they're starting to, and they will continue to disrupt private equity and venture capital, because private equity and venture capital in general, it's become an AUM game, and the money's just too big,
Yes.
and they're not supposed to make the money on the 2%. But if you could run I had a good friend who did a roll up of logistics companies, and he needed 150 million. Placement agent was able to get him 500. He said, "That's terrific. I just need 150." Placement agent came literally to his house in New York and wrote down 2% of 500 million equals X, 2% of 150 equals Y. What am I missing? And my friend, who was a bit incredulous, said, "What you're missing is if I do what you want me to do, there won't be a fund two, because I can't deploy the other 350." And to me, that's a microcosm of what's wrong with private equity in general. Now, I invest in a lot of private equity funds, but the ones where you can create the true alpha, it's not the $25 billion KKRs. It's the one between 250 million and a billion. That's where I think you can create alpha in those funds.
Agree. I think we're relatively on the same page there. It's not David Swenson back in the 90s, where some of the opportunities in venture capital, you see venture capital firms changing now, even changing their model, quasi becoming RIAs, taking in capital and having different perspectives that they would get from being a VC. That does beg the question, which you pretty much reiterated. But if I'm paying 2 and 20, I have effectively no control, which maybe I don't want. I get it. I'm not really engaging the rising generation, but maybe that doesn't matter. But I look at the math, it's not doing so well. They will get creative. They'll pull up Hamilton Lane. Oh, well, Angelo, look at this. They're cherry picking to a degree. Also, the companies that report, how about ones that failed and didn't make it? How about ones that are very coy and don't want to report? They want to report when they're good. So I think some of the math and metrics behind me being a 2 and 20 in private equity and VC, yeah, there's going to be 5% that are great, maybe 10% that are broadly good. Most of them are going to underperform, but it sounds like you're relatively on the same page.
Yeah.
What the UBS study did pick up something that it didn't shock me, but I do scratch my head, and I think you may agree with it. The level of capital of significant families around the world, especially in the US, it was a little better in European families, allocated broadly to commodities. And if I want to include or exclude gold, it's pretty modest. Like in some cases, it was like 1%. Do you think that's way too low in today's volatile world?
I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Okay. How about they also noted that there was only, I think, approximately a 4% allocation to private credit, which often will give yields of 9 to 12%. I thought it would be a little higher than that. How do you look at private credit?
I am qualified to answer that question.
Okay, go for it.
Private credit's been a huge growth area, particularly for family offices. You're fairly consistently getting 10 to 12% return. What we do, now having said that, a lot of people don't do private credit the way I do it, or that they should do it. There's something called PPLI, which is private placement life insurance, and basically it's a tax wrapper. So basically, private credit's a great asset class. So say you earn 10% fairly consistently, and you live in New York. You're getting what, 6%, 5.5% after taxes. If you wrap it in a PPLI policy, you're basically paying 50 bips drag. So basically the value proposition is for 50 basis points, no income taxes. So their private credit now becomes a 9.5% net return, not a 6% net return. So I think it's a very attractive asset class if you structure it properly. And I think structural alpha is something you're going to be learning and hearing a lot more about going forward, because that's what the most sophisticated families do.
Yes, and I know you're extremely good and talented on that, and we should catch up a little bit because you really have dove into that and really are a world leader in it. We mentioned this earlier, but in case the audience is wondering, the UBS report did ask like the number one concern that they look at from the big family offices. Well, no surprise to me, it's a big part of what I do, so of course I like it, and that was geopolitics. So we may or may not come a little bit back to that directly and indirectly. They also spoke about something that you may want to comment on, and that is the severe lack of a succession plan inside the family office, let alone the family. Do you look at that as being a big problem, and how could family offices address it?
It's probably the biggest problem. I mean, look, if only 25% of families make it to the second gen, 10 to the third, and 5 to the fourth, the model itself doesn't work, period. So that being the case, why doesn't it work? Well, there's several different reasons. It's not just because they're not good investors. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it has to do with succession, and how the succession plan is a very hard thing to do. What happens is when somebody has a liquidity event, let's say they sell their widget company for $1 billion, the first thing most, not all, but most of them do is they start investing, and then their friends read in the paper how much they sold their company for. This guy's really bright in real estate, I'm going to put a couple $1 million here. This guy's done great in venture, I'm going to put money here. Investing is not even the first, second, or third thing you should do. When you have a liquidity event, the first thing you should do is talk to an estate planning attorney. That's like the foundation of a house. Then you need to get your governance right. Then you need to get your mission statement. At that point, almost a year later, I would say, is when you should start investing. But there is no playbook for that right now. I think that's starting to change. I was involved in putting together the Family Office Initiative at Stanford, and I just helped put one together at University of Chicago booth. And that's one of the things we talk about, is that at the end of the day, there is no real playbook for, okay, you've made a ton of money in something, doesn't mean you're good at investing. And there's going to be a playbook going forward that will say, okay, once you've had your liquidity event, you should do A, which would probably be talk to an estate planning attorney. Then you should do B, which would probably be focus on governance. Then you should do C, which is have a mission statement. And at that point, you should start investing. But there is no playbook right now. And ego gets in the way of a lot of people and makes a lot of bad decisions.
Okay, maybe a little different perspective from me on the sequence of it, but broadly, I'm agreeing with you. There have been people, including the legendary Dennis Jaffe and his research and others, that have kind of, I wouldn't quite say the word debunked, but challenged the equation of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. But my question was a little more the succession in the family office. My experience after the leading generation that creates it, let's call it a 15-year run, and that's being a little generous, the vast majority of single family offices do not continue on or even get readapted to the next generation. To me, given my life, is the single family office that's very sad, but we'll get to a little bit more of that later. Back a little bit to direct investing. What I almost use the word platform fatigue. Is it becoming a real thing in direct investing? How are families sourcing deals? They subscribe to all these services. They're getting bombarded. Their banks are sharing with them, their private networks. They only have so much capital potentially to deploy. Is it almost, I use that word fatigue, is it too much coming at them without a chance to really research it, diligence, and make a decision?
Well, I think that there's not proper structure around most family offices. Some have very good structure, but around most family offices, there isn't proper structure, and they don't follow a certain set of rules and stick by it. And I think that that's one of the things that can trip them up. So with succession, it's a very, very hard thing. And there is no right way to leave $1 billion to your children. And there's always arguments and fights and lawsuits and all sorts of things. there's almost a direct correlation. I mean, the wealthier the family, the more conflicts oftentimes that there are. But I think you can also get it right. And I think that's where governance comes in. And there's people like Richard Wolkowitz, who I think who you've interviewed,
Of course.
who are best in class in governance. And there are people, so all I try to do is surround myself with people that are smarter than me in various verticals. Governance, it would be a guy like Richard Wolkowitz.
And I do want to promise the audience that I do want you to ask questions. You know how to do it via the chat feature or on LinkedIn because we're live. One question, I'm going to simplify it, basically is asking, Ron, since we're pretty early, relatively, in the single family office game, I may be a talented person. Maybe it's legal, maybe it's accounting, maybe it's finance, maybe it's operations. How do I get the awareness of a single family office? And effectively, I think they're asking, how do I become an onboarded talent? How could I get awareness and get into these closed circles?
That's the exact reason why we created the Family Office Initiative at Booth. So what we did at Booth, I created a Stanford 4.5 years ago. I mean, remember, most of the conferences, I invest with, there's about 123 families that invest alongside me now in between 250 million to 30 billion. And I keynote a lot of these conferences, and many of the families will say, I see your keynoting, should I go to this conference? And in most instances, I'll say no. The problem is it's a pay to play model. And if somebody's speaking, they might be smart, they might not, but the only reason you're listening to them speak is because they spent 25,000 and they're going to sponsor the event. That's a bad model. So what I wanted to do at Stanford is basically flip it. I wanted to create something that really, if I would tell the investors that invest with me, yeah, this is a conference you should go to. So I'll give you 3 real quick examples. I chaired the Disruptive Technology Center, the advisory board at Stanford, and then I started the Family Office Initiative. And the first thing I did when we put together the conference, I called Paul Carbone. Paul, who runs the family for JB and Tony Pritzker, he was talking about diligence. We start with 1,000 companies, go to 500, go to 20. I come in here. We've got an investment committee. We vote on it, et cetera. He wasn't raising a fund. He wasn't pitching anything. He didn't have an agenda. He was just saying, this is how we do due diligence. He was educating the market on something that he's really good at. Tim Callahan, example number 2, is a good friend. Sam Zell's former partner. He wasn't raising fund 4 or fund 5. He was simply, and this was during COVID, he was simply opining on what he thought was going to happen to the office market. Because remember, during COVID, we didn't know if we'd ever go back to offices or how often we'd go. And by the way, he's almost spot on everything he said, but he had no agenda. He wasn't raising a fund. He wasn't raising money. He was just saying, this is how I think it'll play out based on my expertise. No agenda. Third and last example, Denise Illich, who's a close friend. They own Little Caesars and a couple sports teams. She, along with Dan Gilbert, helped to rebuild Detroit. She wasn't asking people at the conference to donate to her charity to make Detroit better. She was just saying, look, I don't care what your charity or what your philanthropy is. Whatever it is, you need to run it more like a business. And here's kind of what we got right. Here's what we did wrong, but here's how we got it right. And here's why we were so successful. And again, pure educational. We had 880 families from 6 continents on a Zoom call during COVID, 430 over $1 billion. That was sort of a check the box, meaning that people are demanding, really want content and not to be sold. So what we created at Booth is basically taking that to the next level. And we now have a course at Booth where the MBA students there's a course called the Family Office. I taught one of the courses. The main professor was Professor Heaton. But what we're trying to do is educate these MBA students, because today the top kids out of Harvard or Wharton or Kellogg or Booth, they want to get into private equity, maybe real estate, maybe venture capital. Very few want to get into family offices. Very few know what a family office is. I believe that you've got $10 trillion in capital. You've got $124 trillion moving downstream from baby boomers to the next gen in the next 20 years. We're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. I believe that directionally, I'm right. I could be wrong year-wise. Whether it's 3, 5, 7 years, at some point, working for a family office is going to be the first choice, not working for a private equity firm. We're not even close to that yet, but I think it's going to change.
Very interesting. Some things I guess I agree with, some things I don't. When you mentioned the 3 industries of, let's call them smart people, broadly the world of finance, I think it's AI that's really going to be the big driver. And honestly, it's going to leave a lot of them bye-bye and in the dust. We'll save a little more of the AI conversation that we've been hinting at to maybe a little bit later. But if I could, me being me again, if I could push back a little bit First of all, 100% correct. We all know the vast majority of programs out there are heavily conflicted. I did a program in Palm Beach. Yeah, we need a couple of sponsors, but even then, I got to be selective and careful. But I would say 70% of the agenda was me and Brian Tiuno and others going around the room, looking at dozens and dozens of real single family offices and asking them really tough questions and having them participate, even when some of them I don't really think they wanted to, but it was collectively valuable to the group. But on to my comment, and I'm happy to leave the final response to you. My challenges with a little bit of the university system, which I have a little bit of experience in going back 13, 14 years ago. And I admit I'm a little different. I'm not a traditional college graduate. I look a little different. I'm politically opinionated. I'm a libertarian who skews to be on the conservative side. That is everything that a lot of the educational institutions, which are bureaucratic, which are laden with quote unquote other thoughts that don't want. They want to be the so-called experts. They want to be, it's our professors, it's our people. We're leading the charge. I think a lot of it is really vastly overrated. I'm not impressed by it. And if they want to go toe-to-toe on areas around family office operations and anything like that, you could come on my show anytime. I could go 5 hours long. So yeah, I'm getting a little emotional. I'm being a little over the top. But I do think there's bureaucracy, there's hierarchy, and there's things that I don't like from what I saw, admittingly, a couple of years ago.
Okay, I would agree with that. But in general, the trend is going to be, it's going to come from the universities. And think about it. What's the agenda of a university? Their agenda is research and education. Without getting political, I'm just the agenda.
Yeah, there's a lot I could say about that, Ron.
But it's research and education, and they're not trying to necessarily make a profit in everything they do. They maybe want to have one wealthy guy donate.
And pardon me, Ron, they're not going to bombard people every second to make charitable donations for decades to come. Come on.
Of course they will, but at the end of the day, when they're having these conferences, they're not going to bring in somebody to speak because they spent $50,000. At Booth, we just brought in a couple Nobel Prize winners. Again, we weren't trying to sell anything. They were just opining on what they thought was going to happen geopolitically in the world.
And they're usually wrong.
Not at Booth. Not at Booth.
Okay. I mean, all the experts, all the so-called economists, geopolitical strategists, which is probably why they're not actually managing money or creating their own family offices themselves. But that gets me a little bit, I get a little charged up on that one. But hey, I promised we would have a little bit of spark and some disagreement. A little bit, I wouldn't say I'm going to go back to an earlier question, and I know you're going to say you're opportunistic, but I know a lot of the families listening are interested in specific sectors. Why don't I readapt my question to be a little bit more for you? Some of the recent deals that you or families have enacted or been a part of, is there any sector that's showing up more than others? And maybe if you want, could you walk us through a little bit of a profile of a deal?
Well, yeah, there is. I think what the advantage is there's a lot of cash on the sidelines with family offices. We have a lot of cash on the sidelines. And I think right now, what happened is post-crash, pre-COVID, a lot of the families, many of the family offices wanted to invest direct. And the thought process was very simple. Why should I pay somebody 2 and 20 if I could invest directly and make money? And post-crash, pre-COVID, I don't care what you invested in, you probably made money. Private equity went up, venture capital went up, Bitcoin went up, the stock market went up, everything went up. But 3 years ago, when they started jacking interest rates up, things got a little more complicated. And now family offices who are invested direct are not only not making money, many of them are losing money.
Yes.
So I think how this is going to play out is there's going to be a backlash. And I think I truly believe that 85% of the family offices that exist shouldn't exist the way in which they do. I think how it's going to play out is a lot of these family offices are going to morph into the multifamily offices, and the bigger family offices will continue to get bigger and compete better than like a Blackstone or Carlyle. And they do have something called patient capital. So I think we're at an inflection point, and I do think a lot of family offices are really reevaluating how they do business. And if they didn't do this until they started losing money. So in real estate, many of these people who were not real estate experts who avoided paying the experts 2 and 20, well, now they got to refinance the deal. Well, they don't know how they're going to do it. The bank's going to take it back. So that's a time where family offices can come in and we get very attractive deals. So I think it's basically taking advantage of the inefficiencies in the market, and the sophisticated family offices, because they've got patient capital, because they don't have a shot clock. We could look at things longer term, and that is a huge advantage. Huge.
A little bit of an investing slash geopolitical question, kind of asked earlier, but a little different perspective. With global order, I think we could agree, kind of breaking down. And I'm not saying that's bad. Again, from the US perspective, something likely needed to be done. Although, again, markets hate that. I get it. Can the US still be considered the anchor of stability?
It's a great question. I'm hopeful down the road we can. Today, I don't know that we are.
Okay, that's okay. We'll come back to a little bit of economic policy and Trump a little bit later. Uh, okay, you brought up about a minute ago the topic that we probably have the greatest angst a little bit on. But again, this is what makes it interesting to the audience. You said that perhaps I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit. You could correct me. That about 85% of so-called single family offices probably really, one, they aren't that good. I agree. And many of them shouldn't exist. That's where I disagree. My perspective, and this is going to be a multi-question, probably 10, 15-minute segment, Ron, is your perspective, I believe, is, hey, there's some really good MFOs out there. You're not doing a good enough job in your SFO, which I broadly agree with. Why don't you just hang up the shingle and move on and enjoy your life and your wealth? My perspective is nothing could match the privacy, the control, the customization of an excellent single family office run with operational rigor, one that understands OKRs, one that understands KPIs, ones that has incredible leadership. And no, I don't believe you need to be a $5 billion family office hiring so-called McKinsey people and ex-Goldman to be that. I think there absolutely is an opportunity in today's world using AI, using technology, selective outsourcing, and the value that I may get as even a sub $100 million SFO is if I follow something like the lender versus IRS model, I'm able to get tax advantages. I'm able to get my family engaged in ways that I don't think I could, you could correct me, by giving the capital to a bank or an MFO.
Okay. I will correct you in the fact that if you have $100 million, you do not have enough capital to have a single family office. Period. Full stop.
But we'll still continue.
Basically, if you reverse engineer it, in order to have it make economic sense to have a single family office, if you're going to invest in the private market, so you're going to have a team that invests in private markets, you probably need about $500 million in order for.
Why does only investing in private markets and building a team classify me as a family office? I'm probably better investing in Bitcoin, public markets, and being tactical with direct investments where I don't necessarily need to have a big team.
I didn't say it does. I'm saying if you do invest in the private markets, then you're going to have a bigger team. If you just invest in the public markets, you don't need as big of a team, and you could probably have a little less money. But at the end of the day, if you look at the cost of running a family office, and people don't understand, it's expensive. You're paying your own admin, you're paying your own lawyer, you're paying your own accountant, you're paying your own CIO, your own CFO. If you look at the cost versus a multifamily office where you're just splitting that amongst 5, 10, 15, 20 families, there's some point in which it makes more sense to go to a single family office if you're so inclined. The problem is that, let's say you made your money in healthcare. So Greg Wasson was the CEO of Walgreens. He should be investing in healthcare, and he's done a phenomenal job in it. And a lot of families will continue to invest with him in healthcare. It doesn't mean he's an expert in private equity or other things. So I think how it's going to play out is a lot of these family offices where they made their money, they're going to stay in their lane, stay focused on what they do, and they could still have that, right? But at the end of the day, to me, ego is the biggest driver of why a lot of people have family offices. The big family offices should exist, and the sophisticated ones should exist. But a lot of people want to just say they have a family office, and it's driven by ego. And that's not the reason to have one.
I agree. And again, I agree with you that most family offices aren't that good. That causes me flack. That causes some executives and family offices that are members to even want to leave my organization. It hurts my bottom line and doesn't make me attractive per se to the community. But I think there's the potential there for the tax advantages that I noted, for the control, for the rising generation, for the ultimate in privacy and customization. I admit, I look at the SFO as being potentially the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it could be. And I've seen how operational enhancements using first principles thinking, breaking things down, and even with the lean staff, what AI is going to be able to do, you could do more with less, better, and faster. Are we there yet? Well, kind of. That's why I created an AI Family Office Masterclass in person this June. Will we definitively be there within 12 months? In my opinion, yes. I'm going to rephrase a different part of this topic we're going to stay on a little bit. How about this? Are MFOs truly more efficient or just better at hiding their mediocrity at scale?
It's a good question. There's, most MFOs are average. There's some that I think are quite good, but in general, if you're going to invest in an MFO, you're going to get a little bit. You're not going to get rich investing with an MFO. You're going to make a little bit better than a benchmark. So if the S&P is up 7.5%, you hope to be up 9% or 10%, taking into consideration estate planning, wealth transfer, and things like that. But again, it's not a panacea. It's not the solution. To create true wealth, you need concentrated bets. It's not going to be with an MFO. Now, a
Right.
single family office, I agree that they many of them will take more concentrated bets, and it's fine to do that if they're making their concentrated bet in the area in which they made their money. Ty Warner is a perfect example, and again, brilliant businessman, created Beanie Babies, multi-billion-dollar company, tries to buy the Four Seasons Hotel. It was a debacle. To me, that is sort of a microcosm of what in general is happening in the industry, is you've got huge amounts of capital in general in very inefficient hands. Now, I think that's going to change. And I think how it's going to play out is when people are going to do a healthcare deal, more and more people are going to go to Greg Wasson. When people are going to do a private equity deal, more and more people are going to go to Paul Carbone or the Pritzkers. When you're going to do a real estate deal, more people will go to Tim Callahan. They're going to stay in their lane. So you could basically still have a single family office investing in what you do. But if you don't do venture capital full time, in my opinion, you shouldn't do venture capital. I mean, to do direct venture is crazy. I mean, the early stage venture model is 6 out of 10 will go to zero. And you're telling, these are the professionals, and you're now telling me as a family office, you're going to invest in a direct venture deal. So I think that what's going to happen is the industry is going to get more professionalized. Right now, it's not institutional. It's not professionalized. That's what we're trying to create at Booth. And I think once we announced what we did at Booth, there were 7 or 8 other schools who called me who are going to be creating these same programs. Now, at the end of the day, we're the first. We're certainly not going to be the last school to do this. I think in 5 years, almost every major business school is going to have a family office initiative similar to what we've created at Booth. We just have a 3-year head start. And the reason that's so important is you need a pipeline of people to come in. So when the one class that I taught at Booth, we had 65 students. I gave my email out in case anyone had any questions. 44 people called me. One asked for a job, but 43 didn't. They were just asking questions, very thoughtful questions. People are very curious. We're not there yet, but we're at the point now, at an inflection point where family offices are starting to become more professional. They're starting to understand the compensation model. They're starting to institutionalize more, and they're starting to really work together. So again, we're not there yet, but we're getting there.
Okay, Ron, let's bring it on. Again, I'm going to go back to, I know I'm beating a dead horse here. AI, you're going to do more with less, better, and faster. It's happening right now. I am implementing it myself. And I've also done direct deals. I did X, in terms of what they do with XAI. I did Figure, the robotics company. I did Anthropic. I mean, yeah, like I have a general thesis. I looked at the opportunity. I look if it's an SPV. I look at the math behind it, and I make a decision to move forward. Now, do I want to be overly diversified? No. Do I agree in being more concentrated? The fact that you said the goal of most MFOs is to maybe slightly perform the benchmark, I am sure the majority of them are absolutely not doing that. Not at all, especially net of all their fees. I'm just woefully often, maybe the way that you feel about SFOs, I commonly feel that way about MFOs. I think they're archaic. I think they're not adapting to things like Bitcoin. They're not adapting to things like AI and utilization of technologies. They're completely, I don't want to drop names, so be careful here. But when I go to Silicon Valley, and I may know a person or two of interesting interest, like it's like laughable in terms of what I or we see going on in much of the RIA and the MFO community. Like anything, most are going to be average, some are going to be good, very few will be great. Don't I want to have control and have my own SFO get, again, the tax advantages, which speak to your own tax attorney on that relative to how to structure? I just don't see the true customization and the governance for a legacy focused family in going to an MFO. And I know I'm being critical on them. I'm sure that some are very, very good. And I think I know some of them. You and I probably have some of them in common. But when I look at it as $100 million plus person or more, why am I not going to want to consider, especially if I have children, having an SFO? So I disagree with some of your premise.
Because it doesn't make economic sense.
What does that mean, make economic sense? If I'm spending
if you have $100 million, which is a tremendous amount of money, okay, that's what number you use. $100 million is a tremendous amount of money. It's not even close to have enough to have a single family office. It just isn't. I don't care if you use AI and costs are down. If you're going to invest in private markets, even if you're not going to invest in the private markets, you're going to need 3, 4, 5 times that amount in order for it to make economic sense.
I'm going to make a bold statement. We're not quite there yet, but damn, we're close. Within 1 year, at most 18 months, you're going to see multi-billion-dollar families with legitimate family offices with staffs of 1 to 3. I agree with you. Do humans and principals, especially if they're over 40, want a human interaction? Yeah, maybe from one person. Do I necessarily need it from multiple? Probably not. When I see that I could do more with less, better, and faster, I'm already seeing the implementation of the programs that I have, the open AIs or LLMs that I have, the integration of AI agents in coordination with things like Microsoft AutoGen, Google's ADK, and what's happening with custom developers that I know in Europe and here. I am shocked by what I'm seeing. So good to me now. I only ask, Ron, and you're generally good at being a critical thinker, just look a little bit more into this. And I don't know, all these college kids that want to go into family offices and finance, man, I think they're in for a rude awakening.
Okay. Well, look, if what you said is, if you think there's going to be some multi-billion-dollar family offices that have 2 to 3 people, I will tell you that probably, unless they outsource everything, they're not going to be successful. You can't do. You need manpower. AI is not a panacea. I mean, AI is going to change a lot, but it's not a panacea. And you can't just say, "Well, I'll take away my investment committee and plug it into ChatGPT or some."
That's probably the best move most single-family offices could make. Now you know why I'm beloved in the industry so much, Ron.
Well, in this particular instance, you're wrong.
Okay, like I'm just thinking of the typical investment committee. Maybe it's made up of, I think it should be 3, but usually it's 5 or 7. Like, I just look at it as a bunch of old guys, oftenly that have groupthink, that often went to the same university, the same reasons I gave earlier about economics and geopolitics. It's outdated. The world has changed. They're not updating their thinking to how the world is right now and the impact that AI is going to be the control layer for everything. And it's already powerful if you know how to organize it. A better word is orchestrate it. And it's never going to be weaker than it is this very second that we're talking now, X a nuclear war or something that's totally disastrous. But again, Ron, it would be boring if we didn't disagree. So I actually like the fact that you could hang in there. You're a critical thinker, and I could learn things from you. I'm going to go back and watch this interview, and then I'm going to put it in my calendar in 6 months and see where we are.
I'll draw a kind of a red line on the areas that you were wrong.
I'm wrong my fair share. I probably would. I'm not going to soften my stance at all. If anything, I'm going to double down on it. I know I'm 100% correct. Maybe my timelines, Maybe my timelines could be a little bit debated. No, I'm not going to push that 20 years out in the future. If it's not 12 to 18 months, it's 2 to 3 years, because I see it from what I'm building and the work that I'm doing is a perfect no. Does it take a level of AI engineering, machine learning, coordination? Does that cost some money? Yes. We're not quite there yet. It's not perfectly automated, but I do think we're going to be heading into a world where even the so-called sub $100 million single family office with some selective strategic outsourcing could actually be better and faster than most large, cumbersome, hierarchical, bureaucratic family offices and definitely MFOs. But that's my perspective, Ron.
You cannot have a single family office that makes economic sense for $100 million. End of conversation. You're just
wrong.
doesn't make economic sense.
I hope the audience enjoys it. Ron, of course, is wrong. But you know what? We're going to find out, especially in the coming year or so.
Actually, in this instance, I'm right.
Okay. Ron has to get the last word on that, and I'm going to give it to him. Are single-family offices often trying, this may play into your hands a little bit, are they actually trying too much? We do investment policy statements. We do asset allocation. We deploy. We do direct investing. We're the therapist. We're the operator. We're the tax strategist. Do they try to take on too much as opposed to building a little bit more slowly and having the capacity and capability to be excellent?
It depends. It's a good question, but it really depends. I mean, look, what you talk about is with legacy, kind of my North Star, and what a lot of family offices North Star is the single family office. I don't think you can run a charity or philanthropy exactly like a business, but I do think, like Denise Illich said, you can run it more like a business. My father passed from prostate cancer at 57. He was my hero, and he got it when he was 52. And what he did is he went to 3, 4, 5 of the top doctors in the country, and his life lasted longer than probably most people's would have, and then he passed away. Michael Milken had prostate cancer approximately the same time as my dad. What he did is he built it like a venture capital firm. He did go to a bunch of doctors, but he put $2 million here and $3 million here and $500,000 here and $250,000 here. And because of Michael Milken, you, I, and most men will probably die with prostate cancer, not of prostate cancer. Eric Lefkowski, he's the founder of Groupon. His wife got breast cancer. He didn't like the data. He wasn't saying, hey, how can I profit off of this? He was just saying, how can I help save my wife? As a result of that, a company called Tempest was born, and now it's a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company. And the last example I'll give you with Bill Gates, irrespective of what you think of him politically, I would argue he did more for COVID than the US government. So I don't think my North Star, and I think a lot of family offices' North Star, is it's not just about creating alpha. That's part of it. But it's myopic to think that's the whole thing. What is going to hold a lot of families together, and the vision behind it, is everyone's been touched by something. Cancer, diabetes, Parkinson's, it doesn't matter what it was. And they have a cause, autism, there's a cause that they have, and they're passionate about it. So my belief is with the single family offices, which is not going to happen with the multifamily offices, and I agree with you on this point, that a lot of these real world problems, it's not a panacea, but I do think that family offices are going to solve a lot of these real world problems, because again, it's not going to come from the government. It's probably not going to come from the corporate sector. It's going to come from Sergey Brin has a predisposition for pancreatic cancer. He's donated $1 billion. Is he going to solve it? I have no idea. Would I put my money on him over the American Cancer Society? In a minute. So that, to me, when you look at a single family office, you can't just look at creating alpha. You're looking at other things too, and with legacy. So I think philanthropy is as important, if not more important, than just creating alpha for these family offices, the ones that are truly thinking long-term and want to really create legacy.
And by the way, a little bit of context, there are some less so questions, more so feedback coming in across our lives. And absolutely on the university question and the AI that Ron and I went back and forth on relative to smaller SFOs, definitely you are all 99% on Ron's side. And I like that. I like to be the bad guy. I like to be, I know, proven right. And not over 20 years. It's not they are wrong. They're legacy thinkers that are part of Again, they want to validate themselves relative to what they learned, how the world works, and their knowledge of AI. Really, honestly, even when they're high IQ people, on average, is I use ChatGPT. Like,
Okay. I
like
will.
it's ridiculous. They don't understand deep reasoning, AI agents, what's happening with AI application layers, and the real integration of it. And you know what? A little bit like Bitcoin, many of them 5 or 10 years ago, they don't care to learn. They would rather be right than make money. And that
I
was
don't
maybe
disagree
more the
with
Bitcoin
AI.
case.
I don't disagree with you that AI is going to fundamentally change everything. I agree with that. It'll fundamentally change how society works. But I don't think it's just going to all of a sudden mean people aren't going to be needed. And in AI, you can substitute AI for an investment committee. I don't believe that, I'm fairly certain that I'm correct.
Where are you seeing this excellence in investment committees? I mean, I hear Harvard bragging about the year when the S&P was up 23%, that they got like 9.1%. I get it. 60 billion. They got to move some money into VC, private markets, mark to market. I'm being a little bit prickly here. I understand that. I just look, most people, Ron, even when they wear fancy suits, even when they have a degree, they're just okay. They're not excellent. They're not first thinker principles. They don't play poker. They don't understand how to adapt and how to think critically. And they have their ego tied up in being right. That's me.
Okay.
Uh, and I know this may relate a little bit to the commodities that I asked earlier, and it may not be your wheelhouse. But again, I respect how you think. And this does relate to AI because we won't win AI versus China. And by the way, if China wins that and gets AGI into artificial superintelligence first, we are probably done. It's very important that we win that race. So taking that assumption, and Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, obviously David Sachs and others have publicly mentioned that as well. And this came up on the All In podcast a couple of days ago. The discussion was the US debt is 37 trillion. It's disgusting. And I just don't see how that can end well. Arguably, because we're the world reserve currency, we could hold things off. We're probably going to print more money. But is even a bigger problem the fact that we need massive amounts of energy production to be able to get the most out of AI comparative to our really only competitor in China. And it's a race to be the winner, but we have constraints that China doesn't have. Although we may have an advantage on the intellectual property, we are definitely behind on their ability to manufacture without guardrails, their ability to for energy production, what they're doing in nuclear, et cetera, and all that. And again, Ron, I know it's not your core wheelhouse, but broadly from afar, how do you think about this?
I think energy. Look, AI is going to require a tremendous amount of energy. You're going to have to build massive data centers, and that's going to happen. I agree. It's going to be it's going to be an issue, and we don't have all the resources to do it. But I do think that we'll get there. Look, I think that we've done extraordinarily well over the last almost 300 years. I think we'll continue to do well over the next 300 years. I'm very bullish on the U.S. I think that things right now are a bit challenging, but I think in general, there's no better place in the world to live than here. Period.
Yeah, boy, there's one person in the chat. They really love you and they hate the hell out of me. So I kind of like being the Darth Vader. Something to the effect of, I can't believe this. If you work in my SFO, you must have a college degree. I don't disagree that skill acquisition is very important. And colleges help you grow up. They help you meet and interact with people. Notice I didn't even mention the education part of it. Most people don't even do what they got in a degree. And you don't think that I could duplicate? I think I'm relatively a pretty smart guy. I think I'm pretty fluid on my feet. I think through problems. I've had levels of success. I've also had failures and challenges. I didn't go to college. Now, yes, technically, I went online 10, 15 years ago and got an associate's degree. It was a complete waste of time. It was bullshit. No, you're really a legacy thing. I'm talking to the comment now. Bro, you're really a legacy thinker. Like, really? Like, I need to go to college to get educated? Like, AI is going to be a better teacher than any human. And I think any professor, if not right now, within the next 2 or 3 years, could ever be. And it's going to totally open up to a lot of different people, be truly democratic, not the way that it is now and conflicted with all their bullshit policies and all that. Boy, like, man, you are definitely winning the chat, Ron. That's for sure.
Are you surprised at that?
No, like I enjoy playing a little bit of the, I don't quite say I would be the bad guy, but a little bit.
You're not the bad
And
guy.
I know I'm very contrarian in my
You're
thinking.
not the bad guy. You're the wrong guy.
No, I am the right guy from the perspective that you're mentioning. Now, I did promise, and I know it's always a bit of a sensitive issue. We've been hinting around it a little bit, but I did put it in the title, and we did agree to it. In terms of the presidency, so yes, I admit, is Trump likable? Not necessarily. Is he a bit of a prick? Sure. Does he lack elegance comparative to the public talents and speaking of an Obama? Oh God, it's not even close in terms of being a statesman. I don't care about any of that. I don't care if he's likable. I also look at what my alternative was. My alternative to me looked at price controls, looked at possibly talking about taxing on realized capital gains, wanted the world to stay what it is, wanted non-elected officials and people within NGOs to really quote unquote control the bureaucratic system. And I believed in limiting AI by having corporate attorneys tell US companies what they could do, was debanking crypto entrepreneurs. And I saw things I really, really, really didn't like that disgusted me, that to me looked a hell of a lot like socialism, which was going to trend towards communism. I know you're not woke. I know actually both of us in some ways are more of like a 90s, early 2000s Bill Maher type liberal. Myself, I've become a little bit more libertarian and right-leaning. But do you agree, although Trump is wickedly imperfect, and I do not like that he talks about a third term, that he talks about Canada as another state. I agree with all of you. I don't like that at all. But I look at what my alternative was, and I looked at key impacts, including to AI, I'll admit that, where I had to make a decision, whether I loved him or not. I don't. But compared to the alternative, this was the best option for me.
Well, look, I think that the choices we had were pretty poor. I mean, there's a lot of, probably half this audience on this podcast right now would be more qualified. So I don't think we had much of a choice. And I don't disagree with a lot of the things that you're saying. I just think that at the end of the day, the president, there's 3 branches of government, and the president doesn't control everything. The president shouldn't tell a company like Apple, I'm going to put a 25% tariff on you. That's just not the way things can or should be done. So I think that, look, I think it's a speed bump. I do think history, when we look back at this period, I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be less than a perfect result. And I think that people will question. I mean, Trump's role model was Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn, if you know anything about what his background, he ruled by fear. That's the playbook. I want you to be fair. And the problem that I have is that these people don't have the balls to stand up to him. I mean, they just listen to him, and he'll threaten them. And that's not really, to me, the proper way to govern, just to threaten people. To threaten the CEO of Mattel, he said he'll have 100% tariffs on toys. You can't run it. In my opinion, it's hard to run a country like that. Now, I agree with many of the policies that he has, many of them, but the way in which he executes, I disagree in almost every instance.
Okay, perhaps we're actually not quite as far apart as I might have thought. At least you're willing to admit that the alternative, with, as I described, the likely policies as us being entrepreneurs and capitalists, was very, very concerning. Very. And again, I get it. There's tremendous imperfections in Trump.
Also concerning,
gravely concerning.
It's also concerning for the president of the United States to make hundreds of millions of dollars off of a crypto coin. I mean, look, there's things that transcend money, right? I do think it's important in family offices to look at this, but there are things that transcend money, and morals and values are certainly very important. And I just think that if you look back historically, we've never been this at the point where there's been such hatred, one side against another. I mean, there's always been opposition. My daughters went to a camp called Agawak. They have a green team and a white team. The green team is enemies of the white team. They do everything. They have cheers. They have competitions. But at the end of camp, when one of the team wins, green or white, they still go to Agawak. And that's what we could learn from these 10-year-old kids, right? There's Democrats and Republicans, but we're Americans. And again, we have to get back to that. And I think there's just so much fighting, and I just think it's been exacerbated now, and hopefully that changes.
I mean, certainly we have massive bifurcation in this country. It seems like neither side could talk to the other. Both sides have become, quote unquote, too extreme. And there are grave concerns that really our biggest challenge may not even necessarily be China. It may be simply internal. Now, maybe there's outside forces, and I know there are, that are making that more bifurcating and challenging. I go back to, Ron, some of the bigger macroeconomic picture that I painted, a $37 trillion debt that Ray Dalio, although I disagree with him on some end conclusions, does talk about eloquently in terms of the debt cycle. We take in what, 4 trillion, but we're going to spend 6 or 7 trillion this year. So I keep on seeing adding to our debt. The promise of Doge and what it could have been seems to almost be fading away. And I find that because I felt it was so promising. I want transparency.
Again, a good idea, poorly executed.
But at least an idea that was implemented and put the light on a lot of the very gravely concerning bureaucracy and challenges and things that as the public, we never had open eyes to. And seeing that the US technology is so outdated, seeing that we had mines miles into the ground that could only, quote unquote, handle so many retirements a day, there was very, very grave frustrations. How, as a family office and allocator, when you look at the big pictures of societal upheaval, when you look at our $37 trillion of debt, when you look at we spend more than we take in, how could you feel confident moving forward?
Well, first, I'm an internal optimist, number one. That's just the way I'm wired. Two, I think that you're right. It is unsustainable. I mean, I live in Illinois. We're bankrupt. If we were a company, we'd be bankrupt, but we've got unfunded pension, and there is no solution. $37 trillion in debt is unsustainable. That has to be fixed. So you need to shine a light on it. I'm just saying that you need to shine a light on it, but the way in which you execute can be done properly and more thoughtfully. That I think is really important. And values and morals matter a lot.
Okay, very fair. In terms of, as we take it somewhat here to the home stretch, what is the biggest mistake that stands out to you that many single family offices make? And they should know better, but many of them appear to make it over and over again.
Not really thinking through what it really means to have a family office. Really thinking it through. I mean, if you made enough money, or your parents or grandparents made enough money, you could do whatever you want with it. But in some instances, even if you're worth $10 billion, it doesn't necessarily mean you should have a family office, because maybe that's not what you necessarily want to do. I think it's become a buzzword today, and like people, and again, I think it's driven not all, but primarily by ego. People want to have, I've got a family office. There are very sophisticated family offices that have better models than the top private equity and venture capital firms in the country. But most of the family offices don't. And most of the family offices haven't really thought through a legacy, and they don't have the proper structure. That's what what we're doing at Booth is not going to be a panacea. We're not going to solve all these problems, but we're starting to tackle them. And I do think as more and more universities get into this and start educating, I do think more and more people will realize, and having conferences at these universities, I think that more and more of the top talent will be coming to the family offices, not necessarily to the KKRs or the Apollos of the world.
And in terms of Ron, if I could give you a little bit of a closing comment relative to our world that we both love, that we're immersed in. Some would say we're active as deeper thinkers and thought leaders. What's maybe a comment, and I give you the floor for even a couple of minutes if you want it, that you would like to leave a lasting impact to the audience?
I think it's really my North Star. People look at family. The problem is our society, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And without a sustainable middle class, bad stuff happens,
Yes.
period. But I do think that on the positive side, I do think my North Star is that I do think that family offices are going to solve a lot of these problems. If you have a kid who's been touched by diabetes, or you have a kid who's been touched by cancer, or whatever it is, you are passionate about it. And if you've got the means to do something about it, and if you could take the entrepreneurial spirit that you had to run your business and run your philanthropy more like that, to me, that's my North Star. And that's really, when I look at family offices, I'm not just looking at rich people getting richer, right? I'm also looking at people who have the means to do it, that can fundamentally make a change. I mean, the Illiches helped to rebuild Detroit. You can
Yes.
example of these families that do it. So I think that when people need to be more thoughtful about what a family office is, we need to educate them more. I think that people need to understand that there's a lot of good that can come out of it. And I think the biggest good, biggest value is some of these societal problems that we really need to change. And I think they will change. Again, it's not a panacea, but a lot of these problems are not going to get solved by the government, and they're not going to get solved by the corporate. I think the family office is where. So that's really my North Star and why I'm so passionate about what I do.
And I may convert a comment into a little bit of a question. By the way, I broadly, let's go with 100% agree with you. I definitely agree it's not going to come from the government. That is for sure. Knowing my leanings, being a libertarian, of course, I'm going to feel that way, but I really feel that way within my heart. And the vast majority of successful families, built companies, employed people, were active in communities. Yeah, they may take advantage of what's in the rule books from a tax perspective, but look at the tax rolls, the top 10%, and the successful companies are still paying, quote unquote, the majority of taxes and overtax the rich and take from them and their successes and what they've built. And to have a socialistic society is not good. Stop playing the victim. It's hard out there. I understand. I grew up in a welfare home. I'm not educated. Like, I get it. Strong people think the world is against them. I'm sorry, weak people think the world is against them. Strong people don't give a you know what if it is. And I think the mental attitude and growing up in a situation where we have opportunity. So you're definitely correct when we say we're having a grave challenge in the middle class. They vote, they will vote with their pocketbook. And you look at what happened arguably with the French Revolution, definitely the Russian Revolution, and the challenges that the super rich had and the bifurcation that led to. But also look at the challenges that communist structures have had for sure. Look at the USSR, look at Mao's China, look at 45 million people dying of starvation. Literally, I hate to get gross on all of you, literally some people eating their children. It was like we are at a crossroads. And again, this could relate a little bit to geopolitical issues and AI. And look at the challenges that we're having. It's an exciting time to be alive. I want to be an optimist, but I also see the grave challenges that lie ahead. And although we didn't go deep into it, for sure, I could paint a more dystopian picture relative to AI, but today is not the time for that conversation. Ron, maybe finally relating to your commentary and mine, if you want to talk a little bit about the value of families and philanthropy and the changes they could make, that would be the impact they could have is the better words I'm looking for. What would be your comment on that?
Well, when I was younger, when I bought a pair of jeans, if they fit me, I bought them. If they didn't, I didn't buy them. I've got two beautiful daughters, 21 and 24, Zoe and Bella. If they go to buy a pair of jeans, they have to fit, but they want to know who makes them, how do they treat their employees, what kind of wages do they give them, do they pollute, and they can get all that information on their phone. The whole thing with I do think that the next generation, it's not that we were bad people. It's just my data point was the Encyclopedia Britannica. My kid's data point is the iPhone. And if you look back historically, I would argue there's a bigger change in generations between my generation and my children's than any generation, probably going back to and including the Industrial Revolution. So technology is moving really, really fast, and there's massive changes. I think that what family offices, remember, the first word of family office is family. And not all of them, but many of them are very compassionate and care about something beyond themselves, beyond their family, and they care for a cause. And I think like I said, my North Star and what I truly believe in my heart of hearts is that a lot of, whether it's climate, whatever it is, I think you take a guy like a Michael Bloomberg and you put him on figuring out climate, I think that's going to be a good outcome, right? I just don't think it's going to happen from the government. And so my North Star, is that I just think that we're at a point where there is a huge gap, huge income disparity, certainly in this country. And we just have to be compassionate, and we have to be empathetic towards people, and we have to be understanding, and we have to just realize that at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
Excellent. There is a question comment that came in. I'll give it in a second, a 30-second answer. But one, I'd like to just thank Ron. He doesn't often do these longer form digital interviews. He knows that I could be a little confrontational at times. And again, needed no pre-planning, no pre-questions. Let's just rock and roll and make it happen. And hopefully we'll each learn something from each other and from the audience. What I think is lacking, besides what Ron said in the single family office events community, is there's not enough more, I wouldn't quite even use the word debate, but more deeper intellectual discussions that challenge to some degree the status quo and maybe are a different set of opinions. Everything is too vanilla. It's too nice. Everyone's afraid to rock the boat. Everyone has, oh, well, I'm on the board of this, or I'm sitting on this. I can't do that. It's, great respect to Ron for coming on and sharing incredible insights that provided value. Xavier, you were the one person who I guess agreed with me a little bit on the AI family office. There's a deeper answer to your question of, will more AI services in the family expose their information, their data, their proprietary information to train systems? The short answer is yes, you are correct. So what you want to do, boy, I'm giving you a quick answer here. Probably get the Apple 16-inch MacBook Pro, get the maxed out M4 processor, get it gigged up to 128 gigabytes. When the NVIDIA DGX Spark AI supercomputer comes out via Dell and others this summer, probably get that too. And what you want to do with the Apple that I noted is you want to use Ollama and download open source platforms that don't train the system. Also, I'd use Hugging Face and other things, but this is not quite the conversation for that. But for those family offices that really want to take me up on that AI family office works right now, well, go to my website, angelorobles.com, go to AI family office, look at what I wrote about it. And if that masterclass, June 23rd and 24th in New York, and I guess I'll do one more this year, probably in Florida, interests you, well, you know what to do. Thank you, Mike, for the kind comments to Ron and myself. I appreciate it. Ron, for those that would like to learn more about how to follow you and maybe be a part of Tiger 21 or other initiatives that you do, how could they learn more and reach out?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and then familyofficeworldmedia.com is, they can access me. I've got everything there. So those are the two areas.
Great. And Ron is a great follow. He has a huge LinkedIn profile. I highly recommend it. And everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I know it was a little bombastic and colorful. I hope you enjoyed it today. You can follow me at angelorobles.com. Learn about what I'm doing. I'm going to be initiating the 360 single family office review this summer with a very, very, very prominent tax attorney and someone else. It's going to be very exciting. Look at what I'm doing at Family Office Mansion. And again, I hope you appreciate, again, I don't need to be loved, but could I cause you to think a little differently in an industry that's boring and vanilla and challenge the status quo? That's all I ask for. I appreciate all of you so much. You know how to reach out to me, Angelo at angelorobles.com. Ron, thank you so much for being on today.
Pleasure. Great. Always great to be with you, Angelo.
Thanks so much, Ron.